Something in the Rocky Mountains is hunting people, and it has been for a long time. Hikers, campers, hunters, some vanished without a trace. The ones who made it back wish they hadn't seen what they saw. Tonight, 3 real encounters, real photographs, and the last story is so disturbing that even the people who lived through it refuse to talk about it to this day. If you're watching alone, you might want to keep a light on. Welcome to Ashwood Nights. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let's get into it. There's something unnatural in the Rocky Mountains, pictures included. We've gone to visit my wife Sarah's family every summer since we got married 4 years ago. They live in a small town way up in the mountains. Her parents own a lot of land, so we would spend our time riding ATVs and hiking trails. Here's a picture I took of their house a while back so you can see the kind of place. A while back, I took a week off work and we drove up to spend the time with Sarah's parents and siblings. It was a good time, and the week passed way too quick. Sunday rolled around, and we loaded up our crappy old sedan for the drive home. We left her parents' place in the late afternoon, and had started winding our way down the mountain towards the highway when Sarah sighed. "Great, check it out." She handed me her phone. It showed that the highway was red with traffic for something like 25 miles on the highway. "Must have been an accident. I guess we'll be sitting in traffic for a while," Sarah said. I pulled to the side of the road and pulled out my own phone. I saw that there was a long, winding road that cut through the mountains for nearly 50 miles, finally rejoining the highway after the traffic ended. I figured that going slow on an old, windy road was better than sitting in stop-and-go traffic for 5 hours. Sarah was very against the decision. When I asked her why, she just told me she had a bad feeling about it. Still, somehow I convinced her that we'd be fine. So, instead of turning right and heading down towards the highway, we turned left and headed deeper into the mountains. The road turned to dirt pretty quick. Sarah jumped into the back seat so she could stretch out, and she recorded some of what we saw out the window. I was shocked at how deserted it was. We only passed one house over the entire hour, and not a single car. Sarah recorded some video of the drive, which you can see here. We'd been on the road for a little over an hour when we came around a hill. Up ahead, there was a single crashed car just off the road. I pulled off to the side of the road and got out to take a closer look. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but realized I had no signal, not even roaming. I took a picture, which you can see here. I came around to the driver's side of the car and saw that the driver's window was shattered with no sign of the driver anywhere. Sarah walked to the front of the car and put her hand on the hood. "The engine's cold. That means it's been at least a couple hours since the crash, right? Are we the first ones on this road to drive by?" she asked. I told her I didn't know, but that it could be with how few people we'd seen. Sarah pointed to the broken glass from the window. "It seems like a lot of this glass is inside the car. If the driver busted it to get out, wouldn't it make sense that it'd be out on the ground beside the car?" she said. She was right. The inside of the car was littered with the safety glass from the window. I looked closer and saw flecks of blood covering some surfaces too. "Where's the driver, though?" I didn't like that. I told Sarah it was time to go and that we'd call somebody once we had a cell signal. She agreed and we hopped back in my car. I turned the key in the ignition and heard the rapid clicking noise that meant my battery was dead. I popped my hood and saw that there was a bunch of corrosion built up on my battery terminal. I swore under my breath. "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. I told her it meant that there wasn't a good connection between the battery and the motor and that the battery was probably dead. We could fix the corrosion, but we'd need a jump to get the car started again. I talked the problem over with Sarah. We were already dozens of miles from her parents' place and we had no signal. Based on the car wreck, it was likely we wouldn't see any more traffic for hours at best and days at worst. On top of all that, the sun was starting to get low in the sky. We needed to find someone with jumper cables. I remembered that we'd passed a house a few miles back on the road. I figured it'd be best if Sarah stayed with our car on the side of the road, so I started walking back up the road by myself. It took me a little more than an hour of walking before I saw the house again. The house had a strange architecture, with part of the top floor hanging over the lower floor. I saw there was a small garage in the woods behind the house. I took a picture which you can see here. I walked up to the door and knocked, calling out as I did. There was no answer. I walked to a window next to the door and looked through. The inside was abandoned, but I saw that there was a message scrawled on the wall. I looked closer and could just barely make out the words. It said, "They can't see you if you don't make noise." I read it over and over. They can't see you if you don't make noise. What did they mean? I checked my phone again, but still had no signal. I yelled out for help, but heard nothing. Judging by the state of the place, I figured it must have been abandoned. On top of everything else, the sky was starting to get dark. I made my way towards the garage behind the house and kicked in a door. The inside was in fairly good condition still. There was an old cabinet against the wall. I opened it up and saw some rusted jumper cables and a flashlight sitting on a shelf. I figured the battery in the crashed car might still have enough charge to jump my car, so I grabbed both of them. At this point, it was completely dark outside. I started walking back toward my car and was happy to see the flashlight still worked. I was alternating walking fast and running. Something about the house and message had given me a bad feeling, and I was eager to get back. I was walking alongside the road when I heard a scuffling sound out in the woods behind me in the woods. I stopped and looked back for a long moment. That's when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned my flashlight forwards and saw a creature standing behind a tree. It moved its head in erratic motion, constantly twitching. It looked like a gigantic spider with a human head. Its eyes reflected the light of my flashlight like headlights. I heard more motion in the woods behind it. I locked my muscles in place. I gripped my phone hard and accidentally pulled the volume button, which I have set to take a picture on my phone's camera. My phone made the clicking camera noise. At the sound, the creature snapped its head in my direction and began moving around the tree. I pulled back my arm and threw my flashlight as hard as I could behind me on the road. The creature looked back behind me and with its spindle legs started walking toward the flashlight. I noted that it moved pretty slow. The moments it took to walk by me were an eternity. When I saw it was a dozen yards away, I started running down the road and didn't look back. Here is the picture I took. After an eternity, I reached my car, completely out of breath and full of adrenaline. Sarah opened her door and got out. "Hey, you find any help?" she asked. I yelled for her to stay in the car and ran up to the crashed car. I reached my hand into the broken window and popped its hood, then ran around and pulled its battery out. I attached the cables I'd brought to both batteries and Sarah turned over our car's engine. I ripped the cables off of our battery and slammed the hood shut, then jumped into the driver's seat and sped down the road. Once we made it home, I told Sarah about what happened. She started bawling and told me that she'd heard stories while growing up about the valley that we'd been in, and that it was the reason she was hesitant earlier. She never imagined that there was anything to them. I don't know what to think now. That man threw his flashlight at something in the dark and ran for his life. And he was lucky. Because in the next story, running wasn't even an option. 6 friends, a cabin in the Rockies, and something outside that door that had already found one of them before anyone even knew to be scared. This one gets brutal. Stay with me. It's brutal. Stay out of the Rocky Mountains at night. An Airbnb offer that seemingly was too good to be true caught my eye while planning a long weekend getaway with my friends. It was a 6-bed/room cottage with a gorgeous view in the Rocky Mountains and was only an hour drive out of my city. It'd be cool enough outside at night to warrant the hot tub there, and we'd get a beautiful view of the autumn trees in the daytime. I checked the forecast, 25 degrees Celsius for 3 days straight. The pricing was also good, splitting between the 6 of us would total $66 each. I showed it to the company I'd be taking, and immediately we booked it. I was the first one to arrive after a scenic drive with winding roads. It was fairly isolated. I couldn't hear the noise pollution from the Trans-Canada Highway like you normally could if you stayed in Banff or Canmore. That also meant I could hear the sounds of any approaching vehicles. I took in the scenery for about 2 minutes before the next car pulled up. It was Nick and Dakota. They lumbered out of Nick's rusty but reliable car. They loosely gripped their belongings with them, which consisted mostly of books and pot. "Shall we see if we didn't get swindled with some shite cottage?" I asked them. "May as well," Nick replied nonchalantly. The outside of the cottage matched the pictures to a T. No doubt it had received immaculate care. The patios were spotless, the hot tub clean and large, the glass didn't have a single smear or spot on it. It was only one level, but it was very large from the outside. I noticed Dakota was staring into the trees and keeping himself unusually quiet. "Not to your liking?" I inquired. "It's only a little bit different from BC," Dakota hummed. "But it's nice. It'll be good to relax here." Both of them were intelligent, but a bit snobby to a fault. They weren't the easiest to impress, but they both looked out for me. And in turn, I valued their friendship and kept them included in my events. A stiff wind sent chills down my spine, and I could tell Nick and Dakota both felt the cold too. "Let's go inside," I suggested, getting chilly. The inside was just as extravagant as the outside. The amount of space each area had was on par with miniature mansions. There was a fireplace, lots of couches, and each bed there was a king-sized one. A definite upgrade from my queen-size bed at home. The 3 of us called dibs on the first rooms, and I was satisfied with my view of a few mountains that the sun would perfectly set between at night. Not only that, the pantry was chocked full of all sorts of non-perishable food. Funny, I didn't see anything about food being given to us. I told everyone to pack accordingly, so we were going to be filled up in no time. Thumping could be heard in the distance, which alerted me. "You guys hear that too, hey?" I asked Nick. He chuckled. "I think the rest of your friends are here." I peeked out the window as the thumping got louder. He was right, the thumping was coming from the music that Xander, Brandon, and CJ were listening to in CJ's SUV. I could hear them bellowing with enthusiasm from here, hands swinging wildly out of the windows as CJ parked. "Are you ready to feel how old we are?" Dakota asked Nick. "I'm thankful I brought some earplugs," Nick answered. "Should help with these fucking loons." "Come on, guys, you're not that much older than them," I cooed. "What, 5 years?" Nick and Dakota had just celebrated their 30th birthdays 2 months ago. My 24th was coming up in a week, so this was like a pre-party for that. The other 3 matched my age. I hopped out of the cottage to greet the others. "I hope you brought your A game and a whole lot of alcohol," I announced, arms open. "Holy shit, this place is nice," CJ gasped, stepping out of the SUV. Brandon and Xander didn't say much, but gave me a pleasant nod as they hauled their coolers inside. "Didn't get swindled, can't find a flaw here yet," I said, breathing in the fresh air and doing a 360 of my surroundings. "I'm a little cold, though." CJ checked his arms, the hair standing upwards on them. He brooded a little. Wasn't it supposed to be hot this weekend? Yeah, I know, but hey, at least we have a hot tub. Shit, ain't that the truth? He went inside with the others. There was a definite difference in my two age groups. Dakota and Nick spent much of their time on the first day smoking weed and reading at the back patio. Xander and Brandon spent much of their time drinking heavily and getting rowdy with each other. They recently had an issue of liking the same girl, who I invited but couldn't attend, who ultimately chose Xander. I noticed them getting into a shoving match and I held back Xander. CJ got on Brandon. I don't want to play bouncer with you guys. Wasn't this shit behind you guys? I said, still holding on to Xander. He was no match, and CJ was easily overpowering Brandon. Yeah, but this asshat keeps saying how bad of a fuck I am to her, Xander answered with a labored voice. It's 'cause you are, man. Kayla deserves someone who can last more than a minute, Brandon barked back. Who the fuck cares about that? We're here to have a good time, CJ said, giving an extra squeeze on his hold. There was a moment of silence apart from the music that was playing in the living room. We both let go of our squabbling friends and Brandon left in a huff. I'm going for a walk. Don't let Rasputin there follow me unless he wants a beating, Brandon yelled, flipping off Xander. Xander stroked his lengthy beard and scoffed. I couldn't help but chuckle. Brandon's description of Xander was accurate. Hey, you shouldn't be going alone, I called out, but it fell on deaf ears. I sighed, leaving the living room to join Dakota on the patio outside. Dakota offered me a joint, and I gladly accepted it. As I lit it up with him, he gestured over to something I didn't notice while I was inspecting the place before. It was a sign that had been nailed above the door I had just walked out of. Extreme caution. Do not go out alone at night, they will find you. I read aloud. I turned back to Dakota. What do you think they are? Dakota shrugged. Bears, maybe. It's the pre-hibernation season after all. Didn't mention it in the ad, did they? I took a look at the sun. It was about 3 hours before it would be noticeably dark out. Nick joined the two of us and lit up a joint as well. Where were you? Dakota asked. In my room, trying my hardest not to laugh at Jay's shit friends go at it, Nick sneered. I rolled my eyes. I pondered between my drags, the sign weighing on my mind. Think I should look for Brandon? I finally asked, breaking the silence. Nah, he'll be fine. The trails here don't stretch long according to the map, Nick said. Let him have his boo-hoo and he'll be back soon enough. The two older guys always kept me a little grounded, and I was grateful for it. I noticed things were back to normal after I peeked into the window. Xander and CJ were gaming and laughing like they normally do. 2 hours had passed and Brandon still hadn't returned. I pulled up the ad for the cottage and nothing in the description had mentioned the sign anywhere. Not even the owners mentioned it in the ad. I sat at the table stirring my dark and stormy. I made for myself glaring at the ad. I must have been glaring hard because Xander slowly approached me, seating himself. Everything all right, man? He asked me. I postured myself up, snapping out of my thoughts. Yeah, just weirded out by that sign outside, looking at the ad, and there's not a goddamn thing. Concerned about Brandon going off on his own, you know? Xander raised an eyebrow. A sign? I gestured over to the back entrance, and he went to read it and came back to me. That's awfully weird, he said. Good thing it's just Brandon. But he contributed, man, he's a friend too. But now I'm nervous that they are gonna find me if I go out looking for him, I worried. I'm just trying not to think about it. Xander gave me an assuring pat on the back. How about you don't think about it and come play some games with CJ and your old folks? I chuckled and proceeded to play some beer pong with the rest of them. Another hour passed, and the 5 of us piled into the hot tub together. We had all drank ourselves into losing track of time, and I had completely forgotten about Brandon. The sun was basically set, and the view of the stars had me in awe. We had all gotten to shooting the shit when CJ piped up. "Where's Brandon? He back yet?" There was a pause. I took a deep breath. "Brandon!" I shouted out, my voice echoing into the mountain range. I shouted some more. "Brandon, Brandon, Brandon! Brandon L. Lawrence, get over here!" CJ called out into the rocks and trees. We heard what sounded like a warped echo of CJ's voice in the distance. I raised an eyebrow at that, but assumed it was the distance CJ's mighty voice carried. "Well, if we're smart, unlike Brandon there, we should be inside by now," Dakota suggested. "Keep one of the doors unlocked for him, I guess." A heavy cold breeze hit all of us. It even made the hot tub feel like an ice bath. We all flinched, getting ourselves back into the cottage without a word. The alcohol put us to sleep not long after. "Dude, you gotta get up." CJ shook me awake. I turned on the lamp on my bedside table instinctively. I rubbed my eyes awake, looking at CJ. His eyes were wide with fear. He was shaking as he slapped the switch on the lamp. We were plunged back into darkness once again. "What the hell, man?" I said, sitting myself up. I wrapped my blankets around me. The place was freezing. "There's something outside," he said in a frantic, hushed tone. "Is it Brandon?" "I don't think so. Brandon doesn't walk on 4 legs." I got out of bed, shivering like crazy as I threw on some clothes. CJ ushered me to the living room, where the rest of the guys were already up. All of them were on high alert. I lurched over to the group. "What's going on? It's like 2 a.m, I grumpily demanded. "Something's walking around, I already told you," CJ hissed. I didn't hear anything like I normally could. "Where do you think it is, Nick? You heard it first," Dakota asked, sounding much calmer than the others. "Probably by Jay's room," Nick grumbled. I started hearing what was outside. It was brushing up against the outside of the house. It took heavy steps. I peeked towards my room as the door cracked open. Oh fuck. I saw a lumbering creature with grizzled fur pass my window. It made a gurgling sound as it passed my open window. "Is that a bear?" Xander asked. "Looks that way," Nick said. "Let's wait till it goes away before we head back to bed." "Brandon's still not back," CJ said, a little louder. "I swear to God if that bear got him." The moving thing outside stopped, then circled back in the other direction at a faster pace. The back door was a glass one, and it wasn't covered up. We were about to see our night terror in the flesh. We all braced, looking for something to defend ourselves with. It was a bear, but something was wrong with it. It was the size of a grizzly, but it had very mangy fur. When the bear tripped the motion light outside, I noticed that one of its paws looked like it had been chewed up. It also had multiple gashes in its side. I could smell the blood from here, and it was foul. "Holy shit, what do we do?" I whined. I had never seen such a wounded, large beast in front of me before. Wounded animals are dangerous, but what the hell could have wounded a grizzly like that? "Stay still," Dakota hissed. "It'll piss off soon enough, but if it breaks the glass, we make a break for it." My eyes darted around the room, and when I peered back through the window in my room, I noticed something swaying in the tree line, more like something crashing through the trees. The bear was walking away from the cottage when I heard the shriek. It damn near popped our eardrums, but I could hear the swift scurrying of something fast approaching from the side. I kicked my door shut, hoping it wouldn't make much noise. "That definitely wasn't the bear," Xander groaned, covering his ears. "Hide!" I yelled, ducking behind the couch instinctively. There was enough room that the couches made cover for all of us. I kept my eyes out, looking towards the wounded animal when the carnage unfolded. A long, very bony arm grabbed the bear by the head and snapped its neck. I heard what I could only describe as a giggle coming from whatever did that. The thing stepped more into view. It was gigantic and thin, and when it lowered its head, it had a long mane and a dog-like face. It walked on 2 legs, much of its hair draped over its naked, wrinkly body. It began to chew on the bear's head. It peered at us, and CJ pulled my head back behind the couch. "Oh God, did it see us?" I whispered, nearly crying. "What is that?" CJ cried, doing his best to keep quiet. "That's fucking scary, man," Nick whispered, his composure loosening. "I hope it's only the bear it's after. Let's keep out of sight." I heard something touch the glass, then drop. It sounded like it was smearing something on the window. I didn't dare look at that. We heard it step around, but eventually it began walking away from the camp. I had to know. I poked my head up from behind the couch and saw it. There were 3 of them now, the 2 newer ones smaller than the first. They dragged the bear behind as they ran away into the mountains on all 4s. None of us moved from our spot, nor did any of us really sleep. We'd periodically check on one another to make sure we were good, but truthfully, none of us were. Some of us contemplated on calling the cops or the owners of the cottage, but that was objected to for at least the night. It was about 4:30 a.m. when Dakota finally stood up. "Guys," he said. Even in the darkness, I could tell he was turning pale. More of us stood up, first Nick, then CJ, then me, then Xander lastly. "Is that?" CJ slowly asked. I damn near fainted. At the glass door, there was a bloody smear that coated the door from a few feet up to the ground. There was a lump of something on the ground outside. I had hoped it was a chunk of bear, but I was dead wrong. Nick got up and opened the door slowly, and the stench of death wafted into the cottage. "Oh shit," he groaned, and proceeded to puke outside around the corner. I was fearful something was going to jump out and maul him to death, but he made it inside quickly. The lump of flesh outside was Brandon's maimed, severed head. We all made it back into town, but I don't dare spending another night at a remote cabin or cottage in the Rockies. You're better off at a hotel in Banff or Canmore. Ideally, you're better off spending the night far from these mountains. Just stay out of the Rockies at night, no matter where. If you're alone, they probably will find you. I told you that one was going to hit different. But here's the thing. Every story so far, the monster was something you could see. The last story tonight is about something that gets inside your head. And the ending genuinely kept me up when I first read it. This is the one I've been saving. Don't turn it off now. Never go backpacking alone in the Rocky Mountains. This personal story of mine is one that caused me to question my love for the outdoors. For what I saw out there still haunts me to this day, and sometimes on nights that are dark and still, I can sometimes see that thing, with its twisted grin and cackling chuckle. I feel like the only way to escape its memory is to share it. So I'm not the only one burdened with this. To start off, I loved the outdoors all through my childhood with a strong passion. That's why, when I had a chance to visit the Rocky Mountains in northern New Mexico with one of my friends, during the summer of my sophomore year in college, I jumped at the opportunity. For some more background info, my friend, who I'll call Jack, had some pretty wealthy parents, so he spent every summer traveling the world going on backpacking trips, which he, like me, loved to do. He went on backpacking trails that I could only dream to hike. He knew that I loved to backpack also, so he offered to pay for me to come along with him, knowing that there was no way I'd be able to pay for myself. This was a dream come true for me because I grew up on the East Coast of the United States and never went farther west than the Mississippi River, and I always wanted to backpack the Rockies. So the school year ends and I'd been preparing to go on the trip, and about a week away from the start of it, my friend calls me with some bad news saying that his girlfriend got in a minor car accident and that he is going to have to miss the trip. He did, however, say that I could go by myself if I still wanted to. My natural instincts told me that it's stupid to go in the woods alone, especially in unfamiliar territory. However, this opportunity was too big to pass up, so I told him that I would. So I went without him, and I started off on the trailhead alone. In the days prior to my arrival, it had continually rained in the upper mountains. So I, being prepared for the weather, fastened on my rain gear and headed off along the stream-stricken trail. A few days later, I found myself lonely and wishing that Jack was there with me. The trip was supposed to last 2 full weeks, and it's only been 5 days, but I wanted to go home, even if it was a dream trip. I only saw 3 other people along the trail, and they were going in the opposite direction of me. Now, I was thinking about calling it quits at the next stop in a small town that was 40 miles down the trail because sure, I was seeing beautiful sights. But what was the point if I had no one to share them with? I wanted to get the 40 miles over with, so I continued to walk as the sun went down and hid behind the brisk mountain tops. It only took a few minutes for the darkness to creep upon me at the end of that day, but I, being determined to get home, continued on my journey with a headlamp. I didn't stop to eat dinner, so I just snacked on beef jerky while I backpacked along. I figured I made a stupid mistake with trying to get a little farther during the night, because now I was submerged in darkness. So I stopped where I was and walked only 5 feet from the trail to set up my tent. I was supposed to camp a minimum of 50 feet off the main trail, but it was so dark I decided to break that rule just for tonight. So I set up my tent and laid down on my bed mat while hiding my face in the sleeping bag. I then slowly drifted off to sleep, listening to the sounds of nature that surrounded me. Later on, the night turned to a cold and crisp breeze. I heard a rustling coming from the outside of the tent, and at that time, thought it was nothing. Then I felt the tent shake a little, and heavy breathing with snorts could be heard. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and shivers ran up and down my legs. I tried to be as still as I possibly could, as to not draw any attention to myself. Then I heard nothing, like the world stopped turning, and out of nowhere, the tent was slit with a stripped gash. I tried to get out of my sleeping bag, but whatever it was, it now was on top of me. I felt my bones on the brink of breaking due to the large weight. It felt like one large paw on top of my back. The claws from it were slightly drawing blood from where they rested. I stayed as still as a rock, unmoving, because my life depended on it. Whatever it was on top of me finally got off, but never completely left the area. I finally gathered enough courage that I peeked my head through the top of the sleeping bag and looked at the destroyed remnants of my tent. I then heard the footsteps and looked and beheld a gigantic grizzly bear that had its face in my bag looking for food. I then remembered that I forgot to tie my bag in the tree to keep bears and other animals from reaching it. I was just too tired that I forgot, and now that simple mistake may be the cause of my death. I knew not to move a muscle or to look the bear in the eyes. So I just stayed in my sleeping bag and demolished tent for the rest of the night undetected by the bear. The sun finally dawned over the mountains. I had stayed up all night terrified to the point I was immovable due to shock. I finally shook out of the trance and saw that the bear had moved on. My heart soared, and I felt like a great burden was lifted off my back, but then I remembered about my backpack and my heart sunk. I got up and examined the damage done closely. My bag was torn and supplies were scattered. I saw all of my snacks and food were gone, and only crumbs with ripped wrappers were left. I did, however, rejoice when I saw that my water purifier was unbroken, so at least I would have clean water. I thought to myself that I may have survived the bear encounter, but without food or most of my supplies, I would be lucky if I would be able to last 3 more days. I now was in the middle of the woods with no tent, no food, and really no hope. The backpacking trail was so long and rocky that most backpackers avoided it, so getting help from other backpackers along the trail was very slim. Plus, even if I did run into other backpackers, they probably could not spare me much because in backpacking, you carry the bare minimum, so I knew I was in trouble. I scavenged what I could and fastened my pack back together with some chewed-on twine. I then quickly got back onto the trail where I looked all around me for campfire smoke or backpackers, but there was none to be seen. I gave up and just continued along the trail with my head hung low, but then there were footsteps coming from up the trail and my hope soared. I ran to where the sounds were coming from, but to my amazement, there was no one there. So I then turned around and began to walk, but then noticed a slim, pale man standing on the trail only 10 yards away. I was surprised on how he snuck up on me, but I didn't care, because now I had hope, so I talked excitedly while walking toward him saying, I was attacked by a bear and lost all of my food and some supplies, and I was wondering if I could... I stopped mid-sentence. My inside seemed to twist with a sickening feeling, and I felt that something was off about him. The man just stood there looking at me for a moment and then answered in a low-toned, scratchy voice, My cabin is just down this hill next to the river. If you follow me, I can show you, the man said while he gestured down the hill. I had mixed feelings about following the man, but I had no other choice, so I overruled my better judgment and followed. As we went down, the sky dimmed to darkness as if it was night. We went far off the trail and I felt my legs fall numb as if where I was going was ripping at my soul. I didn't have time to think as we were already at the bottom of the hill. The man stopped walking and his head snapped 180 degrees, which put him face to face with me, and he stated poetically in a mangled voice, The sky is night, though it is supposed to be bright, and the fear I can feel draws me near. You can't run nor hide, so give up your pride and I shall blow away your strife by taking your life. As soon as I heard this, I knew I made a mistake by following him, and I broke out a straight sprint for the hill, but as I tried to climb it, the rock and dirt turned to brittle sand. The hill became steeper, and I could not climb it without sliding back down, because the fine sand provided no grip. I heard the man say again from the poem, And the fear I can feel draws me near. He had a smile on his face that was like none other I had seen before. It was of pure, tantalizingly evil. I then darted towards the river, but then suddenly it overflowed with muddy water, making it impossible to cross without drowning. I kept hearing the twisted poem replay in my mind. I backed away from the river, and I felt my shoulder bump something which caused me to turn around swiftly, and I turned to see the man standing right behind me. I then asked with my body trembling, Who are you? What is going on? The man then smiled as he disappeared in a pile of dust that scattered in the cold, uneven wind. I looked around wondering where the man had left to, and I knew I couldn't escape because whatever I tried was blocked off, so I gave up and curled up in a ball. I could hear the man's cackling screech like chuckle, and it echoed in my ears like the sound of a gunshot. It was like he was everywhere, but nowhere, all at once. I then stood up on my feet and was struck to the ground with a hard blow to the chest. I tried to get up again, but the same thing happened with much more force, knocking the wind out of my chest, and soon I could feel a burning sensation all over my body. I tried to scream out, but no matter how hard I tried, nothing came out, as if the thing had stolen the air from my lungs. I felt my ribs being squeezed and the air was being forced out of my body. A ring of fire formed around me and the man appeared again. His eyes were red now and his neck had markings around it that only could be formed by the fibers of a rope. Then the man pulled out a rope and fastened a knot into it right before he tossed it onto the ground. Then he snapped his fingers and the rope immediately strung up on a tree that towered over me. All of this can end. All it takes is one little ride, the man said while gesturing at the rope that dangled above. My face scrunched as I yelled, "I will not kill myself because of you." "Oh, in that case, these next days will be quite an experience," the devilish man answered back. I then thought back onto the poem the man had sung and recalled the words, "And the fear I can feel draws me near." I thought of this and then thought that if I did not show any fear, the man would lose his power over me somehow. So, I began to stand the same way a bear would stand to protect her cubs. I cleared my thoughts and stopped sweating. The man saw this and said while cackling, "You thought back onto the poem, I see." The man's tone intensified as he continued, "You are a smart one, so it will be fun to break you. You will fall like all the others before you." The man lifted his hands, which were now turning a reddish color, to the darkened sky, where now there were trees full of hanging bodies. They swayed in the wind, and were so close to each other that they would continually bump one another. I did not flinch a muscle, for I was going to live through this to see my family and friends again. The man began to talk with a smirk on his face. "You're not scared of this? All of these hanging bodies are the ones who came before you. They are all mine now. And don't you think it is quite an impressive collection?" The devilish man looked up at the bodies and continued, "I did not kill a single one of them, but simply pushed them to the breaking point, the same way I'm going to push you." I broke the man's endless taunting. "I will not let you get into my head and cause me to spill my own blood." The sky lightened a little bit, and the man's powers began to dwindle down. "You're fighting the fear which I impose upon you. You might be strong, but not strong enough for this." The man screeched with a raspy voice as he seemed to glide through the air towards me, and the wind quickened. The man had his hands outstretched and his skin began to peel off, revealing a black monster of indescribable hideousness. The flakes of his outer skin were picked up by the wind and turned to flames. "Do you fear me now?" the monster screamed, stopping only inches from my face. I held back the feelings of fear that so desperately wanted to come prying out. "I'm not scared of you anymore," I stated firmly while directly staring into the creature's dead eyes. The beast grew into a rage, but then calmed down to where it bowed its head and backed away from me, turning into black ashes, leaving only the sound of his cackle, which caused me to shake. Immediately as this happened, I fell to the dirt, passed out. I awoke in my tent with sweat covering my entire body. I looked around me, and I had all of my food and gear, but a nasty headache. I then said to myself with a sigh of relief, it was all a bad dream. That thing that I saw doesn't and could not actually exist. I then packed my stuff, just thinking about my dream. I got all ready to go and began to walk onward on the backpacking trail. Soon, I then started to pass the place in my dream where I met the man. It was strange. I never had seen this part of the trail before, but it exactly matches the trail in my dream. I shrugged it off as a coincidence and continued to walk, but my eyes wandered down to the place where I followed the man off the trail, and I saw something that chilled me straight down to my very core. I saw in the distance the exact same man from my dream dead hanging from a tree. How did you like today's video? Comment, and if you liked the video, then hit the like and subscribe button.